Morning, everyone. Shana Tova.
Shana Tova.
How's it in the back? I'll take this off. Louder? Can you hear me though? There's some really good seats right next to me up here. They're going cheap. You know, Mark Twain once said that no sinner is converted by a sermon longer than 15 minutes. Oh well. Good thing there are no sinners here. My Israeli cousin Shiri is 1 year younger than I am. She got married early and was pregnant with her third child when Javi and I were expecting our first. Eyal was born 1 week ahead of Noah. He grew up on Moshav Beit Gamliel near Rehovot. After high school, my daughter Noah went to Israel for a gap year. Eyal came from Israel to do a gap year in Baltimore as a shinshin, Shnat Sherut, a year of service. I saw him at APAC that year amongst a throng of his students, his smile big and bright. Noah went to college. Eyal went to the army, became an officer in the Tzanchanim, the paratroopers. He went into battle and into Gaza soon after October 7th. When I visited Israel in December on a rabbinic solidarity mission, Shiri was buoyant. She had just heard from Eyal after weeks of a communication blackout. In January, Eyal was killed in battle. And our family, like so many Jewish families and Israeli families, was thrust into darkness and mourning. The national catastrophe had become a personal one. I was in Israel for Beth Am's solidarity mission, landing a few days after Shiva for Eyal ended. I went straight from the airport to Shiri's home, and there I met, and there I embraced and bore witness to a broken soul. Still in the early stages of incredulity that, yes, Eyal was gone and would always be gone. Shiri's tears evoked for me the matriarch Rachel, symbolizing the mother of all of Israel, as remembered by the prophet Jeremiah as our ancestors were sent to their deaths and into exile. Kol b'Ramah nishma, a voice is heard in the upper hills of Ramah. Nehi b'chi tamurim, keening and bitter weeping. Rachel mevaka al baneha, Rachel is crying for her children. Me'ana lihinachem al baneha ki einenu, refusing to be comforted for her children, for they are no longer. But when I think of Shiri's resolve amidst unspeakable pain, her voluminous, wise, clear, and evocative writing about her grief, but more so about her son since he was killed, I realize that Shiri is not Rachel. She's not refusing to be comforted. She can't not mourn, but she can't not be comforted. She has 5 other children and 2 grandchildren to love. And she has Moti, her husband, and she has a life, and she has a family, and she has a nation, all of which need her attention. And she's giving it as much as possible. And she's holding on to every potential source of comfort as possible. After Eyal's death, almost overnight, different groups began to create and dedicate things in his name. Blessing cards for lighting Shabbat candles, editions of Sidurim and books of Psalms, and stickers. On my laptop since that day is a rectangular sticker. Eyal's face stares at me every time I open it up. He's dressed in uniform. He's carrying heavy equipment. But what stands out in the picture is his smile. And adorning this sticker is something Eyal used to say all the time. He didn't just say it, he lived it. Im osim et ze, az bechiyuch. If you're going to do it, then do it with a smile. It's a pithy aphorism when life is light and breezy. It becomes a certain spiritual command when invoked posthumously in relation to Eyal's life and in relation to those who mourn him. How can Shiri mourn b'chiyuch, with a smile? But if she's mourning a kid like Eyal, how can she not? Some version of this personal, spiritual, and national challenge sits before each one of us as we tremulously take our first breaths of this new Jewish year, praying it will relieve and eclipse some of the horrors of this past Jewish year, which was the worst Jewish year in most of our lifetimes. The state of Israel is at war with hateful and well-armed enemies at and near the border, and also at war with those enemies' deranged apologists in our country and on our campuses and in the UN and beyond. And now Iran is directly waging war against Israel. The most sanguine of Israelis that I know are finding optimism to be elusive, if not impossible. And here in the US, in California, and even in LA, there's a heavy sense of foreboding. Jews, myself included, have found themselves removing obvious signs of Jewishness, or replacing kippot with baseball caps, or wondering if this Hanukkah, the menorah should not be placed in a front-facing window. I spoke about anti-Semitism on Rosh Hashanah a few years ago, and it seemed then to have reached a frenzied peak. How wrong I was, and we all were, and how quaint that time seems now. I've come across many peers and congregants and family members pondering the following question with only a medium sense of hyperbole. Is it time to leave? And how would we know it if it were? And where would we go? In my little corner of the earth, these questions emerged from many people when I posted on Facebook about an aching juxtaposition. In a span of few days, a few months ago, I officiated at the funerals of two survivors of the Shoah who had lived most of the last 8 decades of life, both scarred, but rather justifiably convinced that the era of Hitler was over forever. And yet within those days, there was essentially a pogrom on Pico. Vigilantes blocking Jews from entering their own synagogue, inciting violence and spewing hatred. Is it time to leave Pico? How would we know if it were? Is it time to take our Judaism underground, lived more subtly and quietly? It seems unfathomable that versions of those questions are salient and in the mouths or stuck in the guts of so many of us. But here we are. We don't choose the historical moments through which we live. But we can choose, and we must choose, how we live through them. And maybe inspired by Eyal, b'chiyuch, somehow with a smile. I returned to the writings of Thoreau this summer, inspired by the verdant landscapes, the still lake waters, and nature's particular heartbeat that, at least for me, pulsates in the Northeast. And I returned to this lovely quote, which seems especially poignant this year. Thoreau wrote, "However mean your life is, meet it and live it. Do not shun it and call it hard names." I wonder how Shiri would respond to that goad. How could she call Eyal's death anything less harsh than it so obviously is? And yet again, how would Eyal face catastrophe if he were forced to? Thoreau continues, love your life, difficult as it is. Thoreau was articulating transcendentalist truths. To live with equanimity is the only way to live. To live otherwise is to be dead while still breathing. Thoreau and Eyal, imosimetze as b'chiyuch. If you're going to do it and live it, then with a smile. Thoreau continues, you must live in the present, launch yourself on every wave, find your eternity in each moment. Fools stand on their island of opportunities and look towards another land. There is no other land. There is no other life but this. I'm inspired by Thoreau, but I'm finding it hard. It's both ontologically true that there is no other life but this one, and it's impossibly hard and depressing that this is what life has come to, especially for our people. There are two stances, both fallacies, that keep dancing in my head, and each of them gets much more traction than they deserve. One fallacy, trumpeted by well-meaning but paranoid Chicken Littles, goes something like this. Because things are bad, Auschwitz is around the corner. Contemporary anti-Semitism is ineluctably going to turn into genocide. While I don't know the future, I think the proposition as a prediction is patently absurd. No future mimics any specific past. The other fallacy, wielded by those attempting to simply shoo away or dismiss true evil, is that we must be headed towards Nazism and Auschwitz for our circumstances to be considered bad and woeful and worrisome and worthy of more attention and alertness than we ever thought would be due. I don't think we're headed for the gas chambers, but our world is meaningfully scarier than it once was. In late August, I was invited to be a rabbinic witness to a focus group being conducted with Jewish students about to head back to their campuses. And these students represented very intentionally a wide demographic, geographic, and political cross-section. And their testimony terrified me, on their behalf and on all our behalf. Who feels completely safe on campus? Only 3 of 23 students raised their hands. What does it feel like to be Jewish on campus? Scary, unsettling. It's like a full-time job I did not sign up for. One Berkeley student told of her roommate putting keffiyehs on her door and brazenly cooking pork on her dishes. She complained to the university. The administration did nothing. A student at Harvard found out about a walkout for Palestine that would take place in his econ class. And when it was announced and initiated, they shouted, "If you stay seated, you are complicit in genocide." And the administration did nothing. So we are not on the precipice of the Warsaw Ghetto, but I've never felt more unsteady as a Zionist and as a Jew. Eyal, I'm supposed to live even this moment b'chiyuch, with a smile? Eyal and Thoreau might say especially this moment. Not to be willfully blind to the morass around us, but to force our way and our light through the palpable darkness. You know the quintessential Jewish telegram? Start worrying, details to follow. There's a whole subgenre of Jewish wit that is based on the kvetch. If you know the punchline, "Oy v'zai toisti," then you know what I mean. If not, I'll tell it to you afterwards. Or the one about the waiter who comes up to a table of Jewish women and says, "Ladies, is anything okay?" But there is something else quintessential about the Jew. Beyond our penchant for giving a well-earned oy vey when we assess our pitiable history and our current circumstances. The other quintessence is biblical. It's riffed on by the great sages. V'chai bahem. Live in them. In context in the Torah, all these mitzvot and obligations and burdens, the ones that I, God, impose on you for their spiritual power, live in them. And refracted through history, the ones that your enemies will bring down upon you for sport or for cruelty, v'chai bahem, live in them. You must find a way to live through them. That is Eyal's message to Shiri from the grave, because it was his message throughout his young life. And the message courses through our present and our past. Within a few days after students moved into their dorms this year, a Harvard student found her mezuzah ripped off her door frame. The response? The Jewish community could have had a vigil, recited psalms, investigated the incident, and tried to identify the perpetrator. All those have merit, by the way. But the first thing that happened? A campus rabbi gathered a gaggle of Jews to hang dozens of new mezuzot on Jewish students' doors. And when Israeli writer and social media influencer Chen Mazig tweeted about this, his line was, "For every person who hates your Judaism, love it 10 times harder." V'chai bahem, indeed. And hang that mezuzah with a smile. As this summer bore on and the news out of Israel got worse, I reached out to many friends and relatives, as I'm sure you did, many of whom with children in the army within Gaza. I was texting David Keren, a name known to some of you. He was the director of the Nativ Gap Year program when I was on it in 1990. He's remained a dear friend and beloved mentor. He's the most modest and sweet-faced hero you could meet. I spoke about some of his heroics in the Yom Kippur War last year. I texted him mid-August, "How are you all doing?" He responded within seconds, "Chayim chayei shigra v'nehanim mihanechadim." We're living a life of routine and enjoying our grandchildren. His response might seem like a platitude, as if he was not saying much, but he was saying so much. He was saying our enemies will not define or overcome our lives. No matter how much grief we face, personal and national, we will respond with light and with splendor. And no matter how much death, we will respond with life. No matter how many of my children are serving in Gaza, I'm going to play with my grandchildren. I'm going to spoil my grandchildren and give them ice cream even when it's not technically a dessert night. And I'm going to raise them to be proud Jews and proud Israelis. Im osim et zeh az bechiyuch. Locate the smile deep within, amidst the smoke and the chaos, and let it radiate infectiously as Eyal would. I want to turn to a teaching I shared this summer as part of the Taste of Torah in one of the Shabbat bulletins. I know you all read it and memorized it, but still, I'm going to go back to it. It has to do with King Hezekiah, Chizkiyahu, one of the kings of ancient Israel. And the context for the phrase, Nachamu, Nachamu, Ami, be comforted, my people, that begins the Haftarah we read right after Tisha B'Av. In the previous chapter, Isaiah has told King Hezekiah, Chizkiyahu, that there's going to be ruin coming to this land, but not now. Not in this generation. His reign will be tranquil. He and his loved ones are going to be okay. His descendants will suffer, but Hezekiah's rule will be one of thriving and peace. Hezekiah is clearly mollified by this prophecy. Whatever may happen will be far in the future, so he's secure in his life and leadership. How should we assess Hezekiah's response? We could take a cynical approach and say Hezekiah should have used the warning to shepherd his people towards tshuva, repentance, in order to potentially divert the upcoming calamity. But we can read it generously too. It seems that Hezekiah is aware that history undulates. There are eras of calm and there are eras of turmoil. Why not relish a prophecy that suggests that our minuscule slice of the historical arc will be one of relative serenity. And if we apply the nachamu words, the comfort words for the next chapter to this understanding, then Isaiah is basically harnessing Hezekiah's realistic stance, and he is buoying the people by telling them that God's message, at least now, is you can be comforted, my people. You're going to be okay, regardless of what might befall future generations. We could use a brand of that comfort now. Does doom seem to hover? Absolutely. And many of our people are suffering and are in grief. And we have a spiritual and perhaps national obligation to live every moment for its full potential and to live every Jewish moment with pride and attention and intention and intensity and awareness that today, even today, this community thrives. Today, as we launch a new Jewish year, and it is and certainly can be replete with blessings. It's undoubtedly the case that our people will continue to suffer in the future. We don't need the prophet Isaiah to tell us that. But right now, oughtn't we channel my friend David Karen and enjoy our grandchildren? And channel Isaiah and Hezekiah. Yes, there may be woe and mourning in the future, but today, if all is well, why not revel in it and be comforted? And like Eyal would, to do it with a smile. This is a very worrisome time. Some sort of ongoing and amplified catastrophe is almost certainly coming to the Jewish people and to Israel. But today itself, you can look around, and if there's tranquility surrounding you, embrace every kernel of it, without always or only worrying about what may be in the future. And if you want to know your loftiest role in this drama, it's to find someone struggling more than you are and offering nechama, offering comfort to them. At some point during Elul, Gabby Fried, who works in our communications department, asked me about our pre-high holiday social media posts. She said, Rabbi, can we be upbeat? Can we do sweet and silly and shticky videos of the clergy in the office preparing for Rosh Hashanah? She was basically mimicking the meme, too soon? Is this too soon? I said to her, even now, especially now, we must live our best and biggest lives, our most gorgeous and intentional and public and unapologetic Jewish lives. B'chiyuch, with a smile, and even with a healthy dose of shtick. It seems that a version of this sermon has been given across centuries and cultures and circumstances from time immemorial. Because name a time when a person, a people, has not suffered and worried about the future. By happenstance, I promise, the book I was reading this summer, towards the end and during Elul, was Erich Maria Remarche's masterpiece novel on World War I, All Quiet on the Western Front. The imagery is brutal. The reality of living in the trenches of World War I don't really want to think about it. But the human wisdom seeping through those pages, forged by Remarche's own experience as a German soldier in the trenches, is illuminating. At one point, he writes, terror can be endured so long as a man simply ducks. But it kills if a man thinks about it. He's advocating a certain essential denialism that permits any person to live through circumstances that could be paralyzing. And we all engage in such utilitarian, necessary denialism all the time. We push to the edge of our consciousness truly mystifying, unanswerable, overwhelming questions. Like where the edge of the universe is. Like what is the true purpose of life? Like what really happens, if anything, after we die? Like how can Shohei Ohtani hit so many homers and steal so many bases, and until when? For how long will it be until he becomes a Yankee? We have evolved well enough to be able to ponder such gargantuan notions, and also well enough to know that we must compartmentalize some of that enormity and put it in a box so you can live b'chiyuch, with a smile. It's the only way through grief. It's the only way through this moment. Of course, we must pay attention to the reality and the size of the dangers we face. Too much denialism is dangerous. But we must practice how to dart in and out, to go there and leave there, to go to the war and the hatred and the grief, and then go to the grandchildren and the vibrancy of this community and our own breathing and the smile on Eyal's face. There's an aspect of the Hatikva anthem that exposes how vulnerable our sense of well-being is, and how it is not at all a guarantee that smiles can be sustained. We sing Od lo avda tikvatenu, we have not lost our hope, and we translate that line as a defiant triumph. We've not lost our hope. But what's hidden in that defiance is the Od lo, the not yet. Not yet, meaning it could happen. We could yield to despair. We certainly have enough reason to. We could lose hope because of Eyal and Iran, and because of campus encampments, and because of Pico pogroms, and because no place has ever shown itself to be safe for Jews forever. We could submit to all of that, but we dare not. We proclaim that we will be a generation of Jews that continues to shout to the world, whether or not they are listening, Od lo avda tikvatenu, we have not lost our hope. Od lo avda chiyuniutenu, we've not lost our vitality. Od lo avda chiyuchenu, we've not lost our smiles. Two images frame and nearly bookend this past Jewish year that we are completing for me. And both images are of smiles. One is the one on Eyal's face. The other is a picture of Eyal's mother, Shiri, with a smile on her face, a smile both reserved and less than what it could be, its full splendor amputated. But it's a smile nonetheless. She smiles as she holds her newest granddaughter, born in the broken but also beautiful Jewish state in 2024. Born to a father still mourning his brother, to a Savta still mourning her son. This baby will one day smile. And every time she does, perhaps she will know she is honoring her uncle, her namesake. I say farewell and bestow honor on my cousin Eyal of blessed memory. I say brucha haba'ah, welcome to my cousin Ayala. Yehi zichro baruch. May Eyal's memory be a blessing. Yehi chiyucho hashra'ah. May Eyal's smile be an inspiration. Is it time to leave? It's time to live. Shana Tova.